Welcome to the Book Binge. I'm your host, King Crusoe. You can call me KC, and you probably know exactly what's happening in this video because of the title, the thumbnail, and the fact that an entire shelf right above my head is missing a bunch of stuff. That is because today we are finally ranking Sun Eater. Now, a couple types of disclaimers that I got to get off at the very top of this video, basically. The first one of those being a legitimate disclaimer. That is the fact that I actually work for Christopher Ruocchio. I work for High Matter Books at this point in time. Check out a video that I've posted a little while back titled basically Hired by High Matter Books. That video will give you a little bit more information about kind of that situation, about what happened there. I just have to basically disclose this fact at the very beginning of this video and any other videos that I make related to Christopher's work into perpetuity at this point, because, well, I can't not make a video about Sun Eater or similar without making it clear that I am inherently and intrinsically biased at this point. The only thing that I can really say is that I wasn't biased before I read the series. Obviously, I read the first 5 books, and Sun Eater was my favorite series at that point in time. Before I ever came into direct personal association with Christopher, before I ever started doing any form of work or volunteering or anything for him. So, all things considered, I would like to say that I can still talk about the series and talk about his work in a pretty, objective manner, but there are going to be some people who the fact that I work for him will inherently be a deal breaker with regards to any types of video, even like this. So if you don't want to trust my takes or my opinions, I totally understand. I get it. I actually totally get it. But that is the disclaimer. I work for Christopher, so if you don't want to watch this video as a result, I understand. But for those of you willing to watch and listen to what I have to say about the series with regards to a ranking of the main 7 books, let's talk about the next little disclaimer here and just say that this list is not final. In fact, I avoided making this list ranking the Sun Eater series for a very long time because I wanted to finish the series before I did so, right? And then I avoided it after the series was finished because it was a little hard to do the ranking at that point because I want to finish a reread. Because at this point I feel like my familiarity with a couple of the books and stuff has dropped to a degree that I can't actually really confidently say for sure what my ranking of the series actually is. I have started a reread of the series basically. I've read the first 2 books of Sun Eater I've read each of the first 2 books 3 times. And I've only read the rest of the series 1 time apiece, right? So I don't have the familiarity with the entire series that I would like in order for a video like this to make sense, but finishing the reread of the series, given that I work for Christopher and one of my jobs for the company, one of my freelance jobs that I've been doing, at least like in 2025, for example, is recopy editing the books for the special editions, for example. It'll take a little while for all the special editions to get out there, and waiting that many years to make any ranking for Sun Eater when I normally rank all of the series that I read basically right after I finish reading them, it just doesn't make sense, right? So I am making this video now so that I can have a ranking out now, but I want to make it clear, obviously, like I believe I mentioned this at the beginning of the section, this list is not inherently final. Expect this list to change a little bit as more special editions get produced, as I reread each of these books. I'm not necessarily going to update this video 1.5 million times, but maybe after the next few books, after the next arc of the series, books 3 through 5 especially, because I remember books 6 and 7 well enough to kind of know where I want those to be placed, I think, but like books 3 through 5, I'm a little bit less sure about, so I want to reread those before I actually, finalize my list. Furthermore, there are also a couple of placements in this list where I can't actually make a firm choice right now. There are a couple places where the books are technically tied, and putting one above the other is more arbitrary than it is anything else, and that's another reason why I want to continue rereading the series, finish rereading the series in some sense, before I'll actually know where my ranking actually fully completely falls. So final clarification, that is basically what I'm doing for this video, is ranking the series right now. It is not final, and it is also not going to be incorporating any side material. So none of the novellas, none of the short story collections, only the 7 main books for this video, but I think that is a more than enough prelude for this video. So let's actually get into the ranking itself and begin with my number 7 spot, the weakest book in Sun Eater, and I choose the word weakest very specifically. And that is because it is going to be Empire of Silence. Mind you, all of these buttons that are going to be displayed hooked onto each book are made by a friend, owner of the Sun Eater fan Discord called The Red Company. So those aren't things that you can just acquire anywhere. I just happen to have them because I have them. Anyway, Empire of Silence is the weakest book in the series. I do not believe there is a universe that exists where this is not the roughest and the weakest book of the Sun Eater. The prose is the clunkiest, the structure is the messiest, the pacing is the bumpiest. Over my couple of rereads of this particular book, I have come to love it more and more, but it is easily, again, the weakest book in the series. It's hard to say worst, necessarily, because I have come to even rate Empire of Silence 5 out of 5 stars because of those rereads and because of the special edition text specifically. I Dare Not Meet in Dreams as a chapter in here. I forget which chapter number that is. I think it's somewhere around 50 something. Maybe later. I don't remember off the top of my head. Anyway, the chapter entitled I Dare Not Meet in Dreams goes so hard and is one of the best chapters of the entire series, but Empire of Silence is the weakest book in the series. There's just no ands, ifs, or buts about it, in my personal opinion. That is where Empire of Silence is placed, is 7th, bottom of the list, but that doesn't mean it's a bad book. And no more is that does not mean it's a bad book. Nowhere is that more true than these next couple of rankings, because tied for 6th and 5th place are going to be, this is one of those ties that I talked about before, Kingdoms of Death and Disquiet Gods are tied for my 6th and 5th place position. So these are actually probably going to be not necessarily relative hot takes. I do know a handful of people who put Kingdoms of Death basically right up at the top of the series, and I understand why. The only one of these rankings, the only one of these placements in this list that was easy for me to determine was putting Empire of Silence at the bottom. All of the rest of them, ripping teeth to actually organize. So, I get it, but kind of what I said a couple of years ago when, I first finished the first 5 books, because when I first read the series, only the first 5 books were out at that point. When I ranked the series at that point, Kingdoms of Death kind of ended up being the second worst, just above Empire of Silence, and it's just I really hate that this is where Kingdoms of Death places. It's just that something has to be 5th, something has to be 6th place in this case. Something has to be the second to worst, even if I don't think it's a bad book in any way, shape, or form. I think that Kingdoms of Death is very, very good. This placement very much hurts me. I really hate that it is so far down the list, but realistically, I also found the pacing of Kingdoms of Death to be the most halting at certain points outside of Empire of Silences, and basically, the reason why I'm justifying putting Kingdoms of Death down this low is that I think that each individual arc of the story is really, really good, but I think that the stitching of those arcs together felt, a little bit stitched together compared to some of the other books. So, Kingdoms of Death is just kind of the second weakest book of the series to me, even if that pains me to say. The book made me cry twice in 3 chapters, so it was by no means a bad book. It's just somehow something has to be at the bottom of this list outside of Empire of Silence, and Kingdoms of Death ends up being in that position. Yet Disquiet Gods basically ends up tying it for that position. The main reason why I am slightly giving Disquiet Gods the edge and putting this technically in 5th place is because it's because of a particular sequence of the book, right? So I optimally should be putting the favor to Kingdoms of Death over this, because I think that Kingdoms of Death is slightly more consistent than Disquiet Gods to me, but this is a really tough ranking. The best parts of Disquiet Gods, is some of the best of the entire series, maybe in fiction in general. The Sabratha sequence in particular, Act 1 of this book, is maybe my favorite sequence in fiction, period. The Sabratha sequence is incredible. I love it so much. Chapters 38 through 40 as well is just absolutely mind-bogglingly incredible. It's impossibly good how good the best moments of Disquiet Gods are. It is just that I don't particularly love the rest of it quite as much as the rest of the series, right? I think that the last act gets a little bit out of hand in the sense that, like, I have trouble imagining it, and since I'm a very visual reader, if I struggle to imagine something, I enjoy it inherently less because I'm too busy trying to put together what I'm actually reading, right? And so Disquiet Gods very much has that kind of thing going on. I struggle to imagine a lot of what was going on in the last act of it, for better or worse. I think that the ending of Disquiet Gods is the weakest of the series because it's kind of the only one that ends in a relatively unresolved place. You know, the beginning of the next book handles that in a very cool way, and we'll talk about that a little bit later in this video very briefly, but Disquiet Gods is the only book in the series that ends in a place that doesn't feel like the end of its own book, the end of its own arc. It feels like the first half of the end of the series rather than its own book, the way that the 5 previous books all feel like, you know? So in that sense, Disquiet Gods is slightly weaker in my opinion for that. I also don't think that the politics in Disquiet Gods involve any of my favorite characters as much as I would like. You know, it doesn't really stand up to Demon in White or Shadows Upon Time from a political side of things. So while there are very cool moments, it has some of the most cool thematic stuff going on in chapters 38 through 40, and it has the best action of the series with the Sabratha sequence. Just the rest of it doesn't fully resonate with me, so it ends up being relatively close to the bottom of the list, and that pains me to say, but that is the case. So Empire of Silence is 7th, then Kingdoms of Death and Disquiet Gods are kind of sharing the 6th and 5th place. The fact that Disquiet Gods' greatest moments are so great is what gives it the edge, even though I think that Kingdoms of Death I probably prefer as a whole. But that's a relatively minute thing to try to distinguish, I suppose. But next up, we're going to move on to the 4th place position, and since I did mention this book just a moment ago, 4th place is going to be Demon in White. Yes, another relative hot take compared to, you know, Disquiet Gods already being pretty close to the bottom. Demon in White is also like smack dab right in the middle of the list. I just think that the middle act of this book has minor pacing issues, even though the content is 100% incredible. And then the first act with the politics and action sequence is one of the best of the series. The finale is one of the most fist-pumping moments of anything I've ever read. The lore expanding upon the first couple of books is absolutely freaking incredible in Demon in White. But on balance, I don't necessarily get as hype remembering this book as the next few books on this list, right? So Demon in White is still an incredible book. All of these books I rate 5 out of 5. The fact that it's 4th place is not necessarily a snub. It just kind of goes to show how incredible I think the next few books are. So that is going to be 4th place. I don't really have much reason to justify it. Like I said, mostly what it comes down to is I think that the middle act has minor pacing issues, and those minor pacing issues are a little bit more notable than any non-issues that come out of the next few rankings. So next up is going to be place number 3, and this is going to be Howling Dark, the second book of the series, where I think that the general vibe causes me to slightly prefer Howling Dark over Demon in White over the long run, right? So I think like immediately after reading Demon in White a handful of years ago, I did technically rank Demon in White above Howling Dark, but that decision reversed pretty soon afterwards and has stayed that way ever since. Like I said, I just slightly prefer what Howling Dark is doing as a whole, slightly more than Demon in White. The fact that Demon in White has pacing issues that I never personally felt in Howling Dark also gives Howling Dark a slight edge there, even though the epic moments of Demon in White are arguably more epic than Howling Dark. But in either case, those two books are the books that basically made up my 2nd and 3rd place positions up until the last couple of books came out. So, you know, that kind of says something about the quality of each of those 2 books. But yeah, that is going to be where I rank that. Demon in White in 4th, Howling Dark in 3rd place. What about the top 2? Well, it's going to be definitely a little bit of a surprise. I'm pretty sure there are some people here watching this video who have noted that one of these books has not been mentioned yet. But my top 2 positions for the series here, number 2 and number 1, I'm going to say are another tie. You know, kind of the way that Kingdoms of Death and Disquiet Gods are a tie, so are Shadows Upon Time and Ashes of Man basically a tie for the series. And you'll see that these are also the artworks that I have hanging up in my office because I love the artwork for both of these books, and it's rather fitting to have them up there in that way. But for now, I will say that on balance, Shadows Upon Time is going to be in second place for the series for me for now. Um, and the reason why I love this book so much, why it is so high up in the series, is because it pays off literally everything about the series in all of the ways that I would have expected for it to, right? I think that it manages to repair some of what Disquiet Gods sort of left unfinished in the end, right? It's the most unresolved ending in the series. The first act of Shadows Upon Time does some really cool stuff to make up for that fact, which I really appreciate and love. The book overall takes some swings to differentiate itself overall from the rest of the books in the series, but doesn't lose its overall identity, and so I love that about it. I also think that Shadows Upon Time reframes many things from the series in ways that are like kind of impossible to fathom, to be honest. You know, I read Shadows Upon Time for the first time right after I'd finished recopy editing Empire of Silence for its Antarida edition, special edition release, and then right before I copy edited Howling Dark for its Antarida and High Matter Books special edition releases. So having the context of this book and the way that it finishes the series, the way that it, again, reframes so many things in the series, at the same time as I had just read and was just basically rereading the first act of the series, made so many things from the first act of the series mean inherently so much different that alone kind of justifies Shadows Upon Time being made, you know, something special, right? It's not every day where you can read a book or read a series where you read it and then you reread it and you experience it in a completely different way. It's not just that you know everything now, it's that you inherently feel differently about everything now. My first read through of Sun Eater was definitely a case of sympathizing and relating to younger Hadrian, you know, the actual character on the page, Hadrian. And I really liked being able to identify with all of that. But now on the rereading those books, and especially after Shadows Upon Time, rereading these books so far for me has been a case of sympathizing very much with narrator Hadrian, where the first time around I was all on board with the young Hadrian and thinking that narrator Hadrian was just imposing himself in unfair ways upon his younger self, right? But that was just because I didn't know what narrator Hadrian knew. Now that I know what narrator Hadrian knows, I feel the way he does, and looking at young Hadrian like an absolute imbecile, buffoon, stupid idiot who should probably stop what he's doing. And like the way that the entire series in general, but especially Shadows Upon Time, was able to recontextualize everything about Sun Eater in my mind, so that rereading it so far has been like reading an entirely different series, just as much as it has been like reading my favorite series, is something that is very special, and Shadows Upon Time definitely did that for me. I seriously can't explain, you know, enough how much of a difference this book made for me with regards to my thoughts on the series writ large last summer when I read it and when I recopy edited those first couple of books. I anticipate that I'll likely feel the same way as I continue to reread the series, that I'll come across a lot of moments in Demon and White, and then I mean, every book in the series, really, but like, I'm going to be rereading Demon and White probably later this year, ahead of needing to copy edit that for, you know, its special edition releases, and the amount of things that I can already tell like ahead of time that I'm going to see a lot differently now, the amount of things that I have no idea that I'll see differently until I actually reread the book, is just stuff that I'm really excited for. So for all of these different reasons, I think that Shadows Upon Time deserves a spot this high in the ranking. I think that it earns a place at number 2 on this list. I don't think I can honestly say yet if Shadows Upon Time is my favorite book in the series, because I need to reread the rest of the series to know that for sure. That's why I'm putting this tied for first, but also technically just in second place. But I do think that Shadows Upon Time is the best book in the series off of memory, and so that's why it's in second place. But it is in second place. It is ranked behind Ashes of Man because, you know, Ashes of Man is still, for now, we'll say my favorite book. I say that these two books are tied for my favorite at this point. Before Shadows Upon Time, I said that Howling Dark and Ashes of Man were tied for my favorite. And a lot of that is because, despite historically being my favorite book of Ashes of Man, I've somehow forgotten the majority of this book. This is easily the book of these 7 This is the one that I remember the least about actively. In fact, most of my memory of what happens in this book comes from a refresher, basically, of, covering the series on the Road to Gododin series from Jomac's channel. I'll try to link that up there if I can find it in the iCard and in the description down below. And so, like, doing that discussion on these 3 middle books of the series, most of my memories of Ashes of Man, what happens in it, like I said, do come from, the refresher of what people said happened in it from that discussion. So the fact that it is my favorite book, kind of feels unfair. The fact that I've rated it, at the very top, despite having forgotten so much of it, again, feels a little bit kind of unfair. But the ways that I remember Ashes of Man moving me on the whole the most is something that I can't deny it. I have to really recall that. After reading Kingdoms of Death and that book making me cry twice in a handful of chapters, Ashes of Man made me catatonic and unresponsive for an hour because of the very moment that you think that it is. And so thinking of moments like that, it's like Ashes of Man did have a very profound effect on me. It's just that, like, I might have been traumatized by it in a way that I actually forgot about a lot of what happened, whereas Kingdoms of Death didn't traumatize me in a way that made me forget what happened. I don't know if that's what happened with Ashes of Man. All I know is that thematically and tonally, it felt like what the series promised to be the entire time. And after Kingdoms of Death, again, finally made, headway with the series in a way that, like, even the pros managed to start to pop for me with Kingdoms of Death, whereas the first 3 books, I thought it was good, but Kingdoms of Death was where I started to love it. Ashes of Man was where I loved it even more. Ashes of Man is the reason why today's video, why this ranking of the series for me is not final. The reason why I cannot say that I've really know that this ranking is fully legit, I suppose. It's the reason why I've avoided making this video. I don't know if Ashes of Man will still be my favorite book in the series upon a reread. I don't know, but there is a reason why it was the first Sun Eater poster that I got. Basically, my first ever poster that I got in general, even though that was a gift from a friend. Thank you to Doombot for getting me that poster as a gift a few years ago. But in general, we'll just say, for all intents and purposes, Empire of Silence at the bottom, Kingdoms of Death and Disquiet Gods are tied beneath that, or above that rather, then it's Demon in White, and then it's Howling Dark, although the difference between those is not much, and then it's Shadows Upon Time and Ashes of Man, basically tied for the top spot for different reasons, and for the fact that I don't remember enough of Ashes of Man for me to be able to say for 100% certainty that that is still where it should be placed, but because of it historically being my favorite, I'm going to say that it is still my favorite for now, until I reread more of the series. All of that being said, that is the list. What is your ranking of Sun Eater? How would you rate these 7 books? I would definitely be curious to know. One final time, all of these books are 5 out of 5 ratings for me at this point in time. And I adore this. Sun Eater is my favorite series of all time. I don't just say that because I work for the author now. That was the case before I ever came into direct association with him. Sun Eater was my favorite before I was biased for it. But Sun Eater has done so much for me on a personal level as well. I enjoy these books so much. The fact that I now work for the author, the fact that I've had so many cool work opportunities, and that I've learned so much through Christopher and through his writing and through the series. There's so much that I have to be grateful for Sun Eater for, that I don't think this will ever not be number 1, right? If I do a top favorite series of all time video at this point, I'm probably going to exclude Sun Eater from that video. Just say that is the given, that is the top spot, but because I'm biased for it, because there's, so many reasons why I can, biasedly say that it's never going to come off the top spot, I'm not going to include in that list, right? So, that's the kind of relationship that I have with this series. But all that said, for this, it's not temporary, but for this for now ranking, right? This incomplete, undetermined final ranking of the series, let me know what you think of it. I would be curious to hear about it. All of that being said, like I said, let me know what your rankings are down in the comments below. I hope you enjoyed this video. For now, I've been your host, King Crusoe. You can call me KC, and I hope to see you guys in the next video.